Hi again. I wanted to finish the rest of the Chapter 5 lecture review, and we left off on the LDL or low density lipoproteins, which is the bad cholesterol. How do you lower that? How do you reduce your risk for cardiovascular disease by keeping that down? One of the most important things you can do is eat both less saturated fat and less trans fat. Saturated fat comes from animal products, trans fats comes from processed foods. So it kind of goes back to in chapter 2 where we were learning about the importance of the food groups and looking at that Harvard Healthy Eating Plate. They really focus on fish and non-animal sources of protein like beans, legumes, nuts. And I really encourage you to look at how often your protein sources come from animals. I think our American diet is so heavily based in animal proteins that we end up inevitably getting a lot of saturated fat. The high density lipoprotein, as I explained, is kind of the scavenger, or it picks up the leftover cholesterol from dying cells and gets rid of that by bringing it back to the liver. So it's very important, and you actually want that to be high in your blood. And basically, the benefits of a high density lipoprotein in your body is that it helps remove cholesterol from the bloodstream, and it also prevents the oxidation of LDL, which is one of the problems in heart disease, is that oxidative process causes damage to the cells that can lead to heart disease. So how do you raise that high density lipoprotein? I always say this because as a mom of teenage kids, I say if you're over 21, moderate alcohol intake is actually beneficial. And a couple of you have commented on that in some of the discussion posts on that you didn't know that alcohol can be beneficial. Moderate is the key. What that equates to is up to 2 drinks a day for a man and 1 day for a woman. And it's not like you can save it up and drink them all on Friday. So exercise is also very beneficial in raising the high density lipoprotein and staying away from trans fats. So just as a review, when we eat fat, especially saturated fat and cholesterol, it can raise our body's blood cholesterol. The liver converts the fat we eat into cholesterol in our body. And that cholesterol, again, those cholesterol from the liver processes get broken down into high density lipoproteins and low density lipoproteins. So those are primarily the two forms of cholesterol that we find in our blood. So a healthy blood cholesterol is less than 200. That really doesn't tell you much. What's really important is a high density lipoprotein of 45 or greater. And actually, this low density lipoprotein guideline has changed. This is now less than 100 as being desirable. Blood triglycerides are the amount of fat that is just floating in our blood at one time, and those should be less than 200 milligrams. There are different forms of triglycerides. We talked a little bit about that with fat digestion. So again, lipids move into the bloodstream as a part of lipoproteins. Dietary fats are absorbed from the small intestine and packaged and transported as chylomicrons. Lipids made in the liver from the fat we eat are packaged into the VLDL, which is sent into the bloodstream. And then the recycled parts of that VLDL are made into the two primary types of cholesterol in the body, which is LDL and HDL. We talked a little bit about the omega-3 alpha-linolenic acid, and these are primarily from fish oils, but you can also find them in some vegetarian sources like walnuts and flax seeds. Then those omega-3 fatty acid recommendations are about 1.6 grams a day for a man, and 1.1 grams a day for a woman. What kind of foods? Salmon's a great source, sardines, tuna not so much, tuna in oil not so much, cod not so much, swordfish, yes. Swordfish is actually quite high in mercury and it's not recommended to consume more than once a week. But if you look at some of these others, almonds don't have any, walnuts are quite high. Flax seeds are quite high. On the next page, I believe I have flaxseed oil. Walnut oil is quite high. Soybean oil, flaxseed oil, 1 tablespoon. Really, for a woman to meet her need for omega-3 fatty acids, she could get 1 tablespoon of flaxseed oil a day, and that would help get it. The problem with flaxseed oil is that it doesn't readily convert to the two most healthful components of omega-3s, which is DHA and EPA. So the animal sources of omega-3 fatty acids are a better choice. Cod liver oil is good. Remember Mary Poppins having the children take a spoonful of sugar. And then the omega-6 alpha linoleic acid, and this is primarily in vegetable oils. This gives a good example of what I was explaining about omega-3s. So omega-3 fats break into this, omega-3s are a part of this alpha linoleic acid, and the beneficial components of alpha linoleic acid are DHA and EPA. This is what really helps in decreasing inflammation and proper brain development in babies, eyesight, things like that. Plant sources of omega-3s are in this alpha linoleic acid form, but they don't readily convert to these two forms. Okay, omega-6 as linolenic acid, linolenic acid does turn into AA, which is acarondic acid. Easy for me to say. So omega-6s, you don't want to get too much because they actually can increase the inflammation process, but omega-3s are the ones that we really want to have in our diet. And what's funny is that most of the time Americans get way too much of this and not enough of this. It's not that this is bad, it's just that you want more of these. Okay. So why do we eat fats? Well, the first reason is they provide energy, 9 calories per gram. And we can store energy this way. Remember that the energy is stored in the form of triglycerides. It does provide insulation in our bodies, both for warmth and for protection of organs. Also, our fat-soluble vitamins have to be carried on fat to move around. As we learned about fat in foods, it provides some satiety and lots of flavor and mouthfeel. So how much fat do we need? Well, keep in mind there is no recommended dietary allowance for fat, which basically is saying there's no minimum level that we have to meet, but that's not really true because you need about 2 to 4 tablespoons of fat a day so that you don't get a fatty acid deficiency. American Heart Association recommends about 20 to 30% from fat. The average U.S. intake is about 33% of fat. I've seen some really good studies looking at fat intakes as high as 40% of calories, but keep in mind that those calories were primarily in the form of unsaturated or plant fats. Let's skip through some of those. And this last little part is talking about cardiovascular disease, because when we look at fat, when we talk about reduction of saturated fat and reduction of trans fats, the primary goal is to reduce the incidence of cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer in the United States. So when we look at risk factors, having a high cholesterol is, although keep in mind that less than half the people that have heart disease have elevated cholesterols. So it's actually not a great indicator if someone's going to get a heart attack. If you have high blood pressure, if you smoke, if you have diabetes, if you have a low HDL, remember that's the scavenger one that picks up the dying cells. The older you get, the higher your risk for heart disease. If you have family history with heart disease, if you have high blood triglycerides, if you're obese, especially if you have fat around the waist. We'll learn in Chapter 7 the importance of waist circumference, but if you're a woman, measuring around your waist across your belly button should be no more than 35 inches, and if it is, that's considered a risk factor, and for a man, it's 40 inches. We've talked about how to get the bad cholesterol down, take out animal fats and trans fats, increase the monounsaturated fatty acids, olive oil, canola oil, polyunsaturated fatty acids, increased soluble fiber that can help lower, we learned about that in Chapter 4, cholesterol levels, things like oatmeal, how to get blood triglyceride down, avoid overeating, limit alcohol, remember the moderate concept, avoid sugar, just like we learned in Chapter 4. There's some discussion about these new products that have plant sterols in them that help decrease the absorption of cholesterol. Benecol and Take Control are some margarines that have these plant sterols added. There are some granola bars and yogurts that have these added now. And then you want to get that HDL up. So activity is really important to get that up. It also decreases the incidence of obesity. Don't smoke, eat less total fat, but mostly eat less trans fat. So those are a couple of highlights of the slide, and I hope you get a chance to review the chapter, let me know if you have questions.